Sharon Boggin from Pintangle again. Today I'm going to talk about the fabrics that you can use to embroider on. And to be perfectly honest, you can embroider on just about anything. On one of the Take a Stitch Tuesday challenges, one year I had a lady embroider on orange peel. But I've seen people embroider on leaves. I've seen people embroider on all sorts of things. So you can embroider on just about everything. But if you're learning to embroider, you might want a few tips on fabrics that are easier rather than setting yourself a challenge. The first thing is that the needlework industry is only too keen on selling you quite expensive embroidery fabrics. This is because most of them that are sold in needlework shops are what we call even weave. They're made out of particularly good quality fibres as well. So very often they're linen, and very often they're even weave means that the warp and the weft of the thread is very even, and it means that you can do things like cross stitches on it and they will be even. One stitch won't be longer and skinnier, Hope that makes sense. Anyway, so first of all, we've got a few things here. I'm just going to So we've got things like linen. This is even weave. This is, what is it? It's a little thing. It's, it'll be Belfast linen. It's, maybe not. It's 28 count anyway. So that all that means is that there's 28 threads to an inch. And in the other direction, there will be 28 threads to the inch. So it's even. Something like Belfast linen is quite expensive. It can put people who are new to embroidery off. When I first started embroidery, I didn't have the money for this type of fabric. But don't let that particular fabric or that particular cost range put you off, because there's other things that you can do. This also is another piece of, I just thought I'd show you some things that the industry produces. And another piece of linen, and I think this is about probably, 40 count or something. This is a piece of what's called Quaker cloth. It is 28 count and even weave, but it's got a mix of linen and cotton in it, which means it's cheaper. This is the fabric I use for all my demonstrations on Pintangle. So all the most of the photos are taken with this on this fabric. In my books I use it too, mainly because it photographs well and people can see easily where the needle goes in and comes out, which is sort of important if you're showing people how to stitch. It's a mixture of cotton and viscose, which is rayon. It's called Lugana, I think is how you say it. Once again, it's an even weave fabric. I'm not associated with Zweitgard or DMC or I'm not associated with any of these companies, so I'm just showing you what I use. This is Quaker's cloth again, and this is the sort of information you'll get in your packaging. It's 28 count, means it's 28 threads one way, 28 threads the other, and it's 55% cotton and 45% linen. And that's the sort of information that you'll get in the packages. Now that's even weave. You don't have to use even weave fabric for surface embroidery. Originally, surface embroidery was used on clothing, on table linens, on all sorts of things, curtains and cushions and whatever, They weren't done on even weave fabric. They were done on regularly woven fabric. So this is a piece of tea towel linen. You can use, and it's just purchased in the dress fabric area of any of the big shops or online. I suggest you go and have a look and a feel in a local shop if you can. Support your local shops. But if not, you can buy this sort of thing online. It's referred to as tea towel linen or shirt linen in some cases. Here's another one. This is shirt linen. Now, sometimes it's thinner. I don't know whether you'll be able to see. See, that is a fabric that you can't see through that easily, whereas this is shirt linen, and you can see through it a little bit more easy. It's a little bit thinner. Then there's what in Australia we call calico. I think in America they call it muslin. Now, calico was what I actually learnt to stitch on, was this sort of fabric. It's as cheap as chips, a couple of bucks a metre, more than a couple of bucks these days, but it's cheap. It's bottom of the range cotton. It's just standard cotton. This is a bit of poly. It's got poly in it, but there's no reason why you can't learn on a piece of fabric like this. This was from a piece of, these were trousers, I think, if I remember correctly. So it's recycled, upcycled these days, something, whatever. I've chopped them up. They were a pair of trousers. They're now a piece of fabric to stitch on. Okay. This was from a furnishing fabric store. You can see that it was part of a swatch book. It's a cotton, I think. Some fabric swatches have like a flock or a backing to them that's plasticized, and you can't stitch through it very easily. So don't chase that. But this particular fabric was fine. It was just a regular fabric. I haven't washed it. Usually if I'm using anything that is upcycled or something like this, I wash it first just to make sure. First of all, because fabrics shrink and you don't want to do your embroidery and then wash your piece and find that the embroidery goes. You don't want that. So I always wash. The next thing I've got here is a piece of, as you can see, it's just a piece of cotton that was rust dyed. So you can use all sorts of things that are interesting to do a bit of stitching on, like this this sort of background I find interesting to stitch on. I'll probably do something with that at some stage. The next thing I've got here is a piece of silk. Now, this is recycled as well, or upcycled. Anyway, this is a piece of sari silk. I bought it from Dale in Western Australia. She runs a shop called Thread Studio, and she sells these packets of sari silks. And I usually buy the packets to dye the silk as well, but you can just embroider on this. Now, with something like this, because it's a second-hand fabric effectively, I would probably interface it just to make sure that it was strong enough. So I would either use a piece of calico, just open out a piece of calico like so, and then put it in the hoop just together and stitch on that. Or I would interface it with iron-on interfacing. Not heavy interfacing, just a lightweight interfacing, just enough to give it a bit more body and a bit of strength. If this fabric's had a previous life, you want it to be strong enough to take some stitching, but at the same time, because it's had a previous life, it's probably an interesting fabric, so you want to use it. So anyway, that's what you do. You can either back it with a piece of cotton. I would probably do that. I would just stitch the two you just put the two in the hoop and away you go, you know. The other thing too, this is just a placemat from IKEA. They're not very expensive. You can stitch on things like tea towels, a placemat, whatever. So this is a sort of what in Australia we would call like a muslin, because it's so thin. You can see. Now this is a cotton, great for slow stitching, this sort of thing. If I was going to use it for a bag or something like that, I would interface it or back it with calico. Or very often for slow stitching, what you're doing is you've got a strip of fabric and you put it down on another piece of fabric, you know, a square or something like that, and then you're stitching over it. Well, if it's going to be backed in any way, if it's got a foundation fabric, you don't need to interface it. Just use it the way you want to. So here we go with some shirt linen. This was a sample I worked for the latest set of templates that I bought out. This is a really lightweight cotton that's a bit denim-y looking. Here's some denim. You can stitch on denim. It's just fine to stitch on. This is a slightly heavier weight cotton. Now, something like this would be ideal because of the stripes. You could just, if you're doing a sample, if you're learning how to embroider, you could easily just do a line after line after line of the various stitches that you're learning. Because it's a stripe, you just have to follow the stripe and it'll end up looking good. And that's just a cotton. It was a dress fabric. Now, I found this in an op shop. It's creased because it's been at the bottom of the basket. But it's just a cotton, quite an open weave. It's the sort of thing that you could pick up at an op shop. It's a little placemat thing or whatever. And you could turn this into a sampler and it would be very useful to learn on. Here's another instance of silk it's interesting to look at, but it's thin. So I would probably back that, but you can use it. This is some of that tea towel linen that I have dyed and done things with. Okay, I put this in because it's synthetic. There's no reason why you can't stitch on a synthetic. I do crazy quilting and I use synthetics in my work as well as silks and more expensive fabrics, but there's no reason why you can't use a synthetic. This is just a cotton. It was a blouse that I had, so it's anything with a pattern on you can sometimes have a lot of fun with. This sort of pattern you could add stitches to and enhance the pattern and enjoy stitching it. It's a cotton rayon. It was a blouse that I had. Okay, this is wool. So wool from the dressmaking fabric area of the fabric store is fine. So as you can see, this is quite thin. You can't see through it, but it's quite thin and nice. It would be nice to stitch on. This is wool suiting. Wool's lovely to stitch on, actually. So there's that. This was a woolen skirt and I chucked it in the washing machine in a hot wash and then chucked it in a cold, so shocked it with cold water so it would shrink and partially felt, and it did, and it's quite nice. So you can stitch on that. And then there's commercial felt, lovely to work with, just have fun, expensive though if it's real wool. And then there's these, I got this from Thread Studio too. She calls them flimsies. They're partially felted, but they're strong enough to stitch on. And usually something like this, I would apply it to a background and stitch over that. And you use it in an applique sense, but you can stitch on them. So that's it. I hope this has given you a few ideas for what you can stitch on, what you can use. There's loads there, that economical options and creatively interesting options. So in fact, look at that. That could be the colour range for a project. Might do that. Okay, thank you for listening and I hope it's been useful. Please subscribe, like, do all that stuff. Also, if you've got any questions, just leave a comment below and I'll do my best to answer them.